Darnell Cole was 37 years old when his wife's attorney looked across a courtroom table, took in the quiet man in the plain charcoal suit sitting across from him, with no jewelry and no entourage, and no visible indication of anything, and smirked. The particular smirk of a man who has walked into 200 rooms exactly like this one, and believed with complete confidence that he already knew how it was going to end. Richard Voss had built his reputation on that smirk. It was part of the architecture of how he won, established dominance before the first document was produced, destabilize the opposing party in the first 60 seconds, make the other man feel the size of the gap between them. It had worked for 19 years, without failure. He had never once made the mistake he was about to make that Tuesday morning. Simone Cole had married Darnell at a garden venue in Buckhead in the spring of 2016, and had spent the years since building a life she intended to exit cleanly, efficiently, and at maximum return. She had found her attorney through a referral network, retained him without hesitation, and handed him a strategy she believed was airtight. She had done her research. She had covered her angles. What she did not know, what she had never once thought to look for, was that the man across the table from Richard Voss was the silent majority principal of the holding company that owned 73% of Voss & Crane's parent entity, controlled the lease on the building where the firm operated, and held the master contract on their malpractice insurance policy. She had absolutely no idea who had been writing the checks. Richard Voss did not know either. Not yet. What happened in that hearing room in the next 45 minutes would end a career, open a state bar investigation, and leave Simone Cole without counsel on the worst possible day of her life. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came into Darnell Cole's study at an angle that suited the room, settling across the surface of the long oak table he had built himself from reclaimed barnwood sourced from a property in Dahlonega, 200 miles north of Atlanta, that his company had acquired and later sold at a profit. The table was not a status object. It was a working surface, marked at the corners with coffee rings he had never bothered to remove, stacked along one side with acquisition files in color-coded folders, and anchored at the center by a laptop he had owned for 4 years and saw no reason to replace. Simone had asked him once, early in the marriage, why he did not get a proper desk, something with a glass top and clean lines, something that matched the rest of the house. He had said he liked what he had built. She had moved on from the subject immediately and never returned to it. He worked in business acquisitions, had been doing it since his late 20s, starting as an analyst at a regional investment firm, then departing to run his own operation, Meridian Capital Holdings, out of a suite of offices in Midtown that looked unremarkable from the lobby and held, across its 6 principals and 2 support staff, a portfolio of 31 business interests across 6 states. He looked for companies with structural instability that their current owners had stopped being able to see. He studied their architecture, identified the load-bearing problems, acquired at value, and stabilized. He was not interested in flash. He was interested in function. His grandmother, Velma Cole, had raised him in a house on Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard with the kind of practical wisdom that required no dramatization. She had told him once when he was 16 and angry about something that no longer mattered, Darnell, "A loud man tells you what he wants you to think. A quiet man shows you what he actually built." She had passed 2 years ago, at 81, in her sleep, and the framed photograph of her on the corner of his desk was the only decoration in the room that was not work. He had met Simone at a business networking event in Midtown in 2014. She was a marketing director at a regional hospitality firm, polished and precise and quick. and she had introduced herself with a handshake that meant something. He had been drawn to her directness. He had married a quality that turned out to be something other than what it had appeared. That happens sometimes in acquisitions too. You studied what was visible on the surface, and the structural damage underneath was deeper than any of the documents suggested. They bought a house in Cascade Heights in 2017. He built the study table himself, assembled the deck furniture from raw lumber one weekend while she was visiting her sister, and replaced the kitchen cabinetry one section at a time across 3 consecutive Saturdays. She had complimented the kitchen to guests at a dinner party in 2019 without mentioning that her husband had built it. Meridian had taken 12 years to build into what it was. It had started as a single acquisition, a struggling print shop in Decatur that Darnell had purchased at 29 with money he had saved, and a loan from a credit union he had to explain his plan to 3 times before they agreed. He had stabilized that shop, sold it at a profit 18 months later, and used the proceeds as the anchor of the next deal, and the one after that. And he had built the whole structure the way he built furniture, one joint at a time, without rushing, without announcing it to anyone who was not directly involved in the work. The business card holder on the corner of his desk had sat there for 4 years, unremarked upon, holding 30 cards that read, Meridian Capital Holdings, D. Cole, Principal. Simone had picked one up in 2020 while looking for a pen, set it back down without reading it, and walked out of the room. She had done this the way a person dismisses something they have already decided is not relevant to them. It was the last week of February when she told him she had been speaking with an attorney about clarifying some things regarding their future. He had looked at her steadily and said that sounded like a reasonable thing to do. He had gone back to his desk and opened the file he had been reviewing before she walked in, and he had sat with that conversation the way he sat with all information, without reaction, with measurement. The value of a thing was never in how it presented itself. 3 weeks passed in the ordinary shape of their life together. He traveled to Birmingham for a 2-day due diligence visit on a logistics company. He attended a board meeting in Midtown. He came home and cooked, and sat at the long oak table with his files and his coffee. And Simone moved around the house with the contained energy of someone managing a private timeline that she believed no one else could read. On a Wednesday evening, he arrived home earlier than expected from a client dinner that had ended an hour ahead of schedule. He set down his keys at the front table. He walked toward the kitchen. From the hallway, he could hear her voice clearly, low and practiced, coming through the slightly open bedroom door. She was going through numbers, specific ones. The assessed value of the Cascade Heights property. The difficulty of valuing a privately held business without a court-ordered forensic review. The timeline that bought her, then a pause and a laugh, brief and assured, meant for the man on the other end of the call. He stood in the hallway and listened for exactly 90 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to the kitchen and filled a glass of water at the sink and drank it. His hands were steady. He set the glass down and looked through the window at the deck furniture he had built, which was holding up exactly as he had built it to. He went to his study and closed the door behind him. He opened his laptop and navigated to the account management portal for the Meridian portfolio. He typed Voss and Crane into the entity search registry, a name he recognized as one of 7 professional services companies held under the Meridian umbrella through a parent entity called Ascent Professional Group, acquired 3 years prior as part of a distressed assets package. He opened the file. He reviewed the ownership structure. He read the name of the managing partner. Richard Voss. He sat with that information for a long moment. His face remained perfectly calm. He opened a second tab and confirmed the bar registration, the firm name, and the registered business address. Then, he opened the joint financial files he maintained and spent 2 hours reviewing every account he had access to in the marriage. The pattern emerged with the same clarity it always did once he knew what he was looking for. $11,400 redirected from a joint discretionary account across 7 months, routed through a payment platform he had never used, to an account registered to a man named Brandon Holt. A credit card on the joint account, with charges at 2 Midtown hotels, 4 restaurant billings in Virginia Highland, and 3 charges at a florist he had never been told about. He cross-referenced the hotel dates against his own travel calendar. Every single date was a day he had been out of the city. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined everything he did. He opened a contact on his phone he had not called for personal matters in 5 years. Beverly Okafor, his corporate attorney of 9 years, who had drafted every significant Meridian acquisition agreement since he was 31 years old. "Beverly," he said when she answered, "I need personal counsel this week. And when you come, pull everything on Ascent Professional Group. I want the full Voss & Crane chain of ownership in the room." He ended the call. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it Cole v. Cole. Every pattern had a beginning. Find the beginning, and the rest unspools on its own. Beverly Okafor's office was on the 23rd floor of a building on Peachtree Street, with a view of Midtown she had never once mentioned to a client. She was a compact and exacting woman who kept her desk cleared to the current matter and communicated primarily in the precise language of what was documented and what was not. She sat across from Darnell on Thursday morning with the Ascent Professional Group file open in front of her and both hands flat on the table. "So, you own the firm," she said. "Meridian holds 73% of Ascent, which holds the controlling interest in Voss & Crane's operating entity, the building lease, and the malpractice insurance contract," Darnell said. "Through 3 layers of holding structure." Beverly looked at the ownership chain and then at him. When she retained him, that created an undisclosed conflict of interest. Voss has an obligation under Rule 1.7 to run a conflicts check before accepting any engagement. He would have had to search the firm's ownership registry. Would he have found Meridian in that search? Not easily. The chain goes, you, individually, to Meridian Capital Holdings, to Ascent Professional Group Holdings, to Voss & Crane Professional Services. 3 entity layers between your name and the firm name. She paused. He would have needed to look carefully. There is no indication he looked at all. Which means when this surfaces, he has a disclosure failure, a duty of loyalty problem, and depending on what he files before we raise it, potentially a conduct issue on top of both. She closed the file. This doesn't complicate his involvement in the matter. It ends it. And it may not end there. She told him to give her 1 week and to tell her everything he wanted in the record. He drove afterward to his Aunt Gloria's house in College Park, his mother's older sister, who cultivated orchids on her back porch and strong opinions about everyone in the family, including Simone, for whom she had expressed carefully worded reservations at the wedding in 2016 and considerably less careful ones in the years since. She was 64 years old, moved slowly through rooms, and thought quickly about everything she observed. She met Darnell at the door with the expression of a woman who had been expecting this particular conversation for approximately 3 years. He sat at her kitchen table with sweet tea and told her the outline of it. Gloria was quiet for a long time, looking at her hands. "Your grandmother told me once," she said, "that a man who doesn't understand the value of what he already has is not going to recognize it when it's gone." She wasn't talking about money. She looked up at him. But she also wasn't not talking about money. Darnell looked at his glass. "Do what you need to do," Gloria said. "Do it right. Don't do it mean." That evening he came home, and Simone had made dinner, and they ate together at the kitchen table that he had built, and she had never once mentioned building, and she asked him about a logistics deal he had been working in Birmingham. And he gave her a real and detailed answer the way he always had, and she listened and nodded with the focused attention of a woman performing attentiveness while calculating something else entirely. She had no idea the man she had hired to dismantle her husband's position answered to that husband directly. He cleared the dishes. He went to his study. He worked until 11. Patience was not weakness. Patience was calibration. By Wednesday of the following week, Beverly's team had completed the documentation package. The $11,400 was clean, traced, and time-stamped across 7 months. The hotel charges were cross-referenced against his travel records in a table that required no interpretation. The ownership chain for Voss and Crane was laid out in 4 precise pages. And Beverly's associate had surfaced one additional finding. 18 months prior, Richard Voss had represented a commercial client in a contract dispute, without disclosing that the opposing party's parent company was also an Ascent subsidiary. That matter had settled, but the conflict existed on record, undisclosed, a second instance that would not read as an oversight to a disciplinary board. Beverly delivered all of it at Thursday's follow-up with the same flat precision she used for everything. "He didn't check," she said. "Not once in 3 years. And Holt?" Beverly turned to the last 2 pages of the summary. Brandon Holt's development partnership, the one Simone's redirected funds had been flowing into, had never been formally disclosed as a business interest in any of the standard financial statements the couple had filed jointly. The payments constituted undisclosed transfers to a third-party business venture in which Simone held an interest, which crossed from marital dissipation into a separate category of financial concealment entirely. She was not just moving money out, Beverly said. She was investing it in a venture with a man she was involved with personally, and none of it was disclosed. Darnell looked at the documents on the table. He thought about his grandmother's photograph on his desk and what she had told him when he was 16 about loud men and quiet ones. "File what needs to be filed," he said, "and make sure the full disclosure package is in the room before anyone opens a binder." Some things took time. That was not the same as some things not working. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the Fulton County Courthouse, an initial conference on the division of marital assets. Richard Voss arrived in a well-cut gray suit with a leather portfolio and the practiced ease of a man who had walked into this building 200 times. Simone sat beside him, composed, not looking at Darnell when he entered. Darnell came in with Beverly Okafor and a paralegal carrying a document case. He wore a plain dark suit, no tie, and sat down across the table without any announcement. Richard Voss glanced at him. The glance lasted 2 seconds and contained a full assessment. The smirk arrived and departed in less than 1. The presiding mediator opened the session. Voss began with the fluency of a man establishing command, assets in dispute, the private nature of the business portfolio making full valuation a matter for forensic review, his intention to file for a full financial disclosure order within 10 days. He was building the room around him, the way he always did, one procedural brick at a time. He was 3 sentences in when Beverly raised one hand. "Before we proceed," she said, "I need to enter a disclosure matter for the record." The mediator nodded. Beverly opened the document case and placed a single packet in front of the mediator, in front of Voss, and in front of Simone. 22 pages, cleanly tabbed and labeled. This document establishes that Mr. Voss's firm operates under a parent holding entity, Ascent professional group, in which my client's company, Meridian Capital Holdings, holds a 73% controlling interest. The chain of ownership is documented on pages 3 through 7. The lease on the building where Voss and Crane operates is held through an Ascent subsidiary. The firm's malpractice insurance is issued through an Ascent-affiliated carrier. The room went entirely still. Voss looked at the packet. He turned to page 3. He read the ownership chain with the expression of a man who has placed his full weight on what he believed was solid ground and found nothing beneath his foot. The mediator set down her pen. She looked at Voss directly. "Mr. Voss, were you aware of this ownership structure when you accepted this matter?" The silence lasted longer than it should have. "I was not," he said. "Did you run a conflicts check prior to accepting the engagement?" Beverly spoke before he could fully answer. "We have additionally identified a prior matter, page 18 of the packet, in which Mr. Voss represented a client in a commercial dispute without disclosing that the opposing party's parent company was also an Ascent subsidiary. That conflict was also undisclosed." Simone turned and looked at Richard Voss with an expression that moved very quickly through confusion, then understanding, then something much colder than either. "Richard," she said. One word. He was already closing his portfolio. The mediator suspended the proceeding. She instructed Voss to consult independent ethics counsel before any further involvement in the matter. She stated for the record that the disclosure document would be forwarded to the Georgia State Bar for review. She asked Simone whether she wished to request a continuance to secure new representation. Simone did not answer. She was looking across the table at her husband, at the man in the plain dark suit who had built a table from barnwood in his home study and kept a business card holder on his desk for 4 years that she had picked up once and set back down without reading. Darnell stood, and he picked up his copy of the packet and his phone, and he buttoned his jacket, and he looked at the room, at the mediator and the court reporter and Beverly standing steady beside him, and Simone at the far end of the table, with a 22-page document in front of her that mapped the precise shape of everything she had misunderstood. And he understood that he had spent the last 4 months building a case the way he built everything else, quietly, without announcement, one joint at a time. "You handed a man a case," he said quietly, "built on money you moved in pieces over 7 months. And you sat across from me at a table I built with my own hands and asked about my work like you were interested. And in 7 years you never once asked what I actually owned." He paused. "You only ever asked what it was worth to you." He walked to the door. He did not look back. The room was very still behind him, and the only sound was the measured scratch of the court reporter's pen as she noted the time of the suspension for the record. He was done. 10 months later, Darnell Cole sat on the back deck of a house in East Point that he had renovated from the studs out across the first 3 months after the divorce was finalized. New framing in the sunroom, a deck of pressure-treated cedar he had laid board by board over 2 weekends, a kitchen rebuilt around a salvaged butcher block countertop he had found for $200 at a demolition site in Hapeville. The house was smaller than the one in Cascade Heights. He did not miss the one in Cascade Heights. A woman named Jade sat beside him in the second cedar chair with a glass of water and a notebook open in her lap. She was a civil engineer he had met at a professional conference in Athens 7 months prior, and she had introduced herself by asking a sharp and specific question during his panel presentation, and then waiting with real patience for his answer. She laughed at things that were actually funny. She did not perform for rooms. She had been coming to this house on weekend mornings for about 3 months now, quietly and without ceremony, the way things that are meant to last tend to begin. Meridian had closed 2 new acquisitions in the spring, a regional logistics operation and a commercial property management company in Savannah, and the portfolio had grown to 37 entities. That summer, Darnell had endowed a mentorship fund through a nonprofit in Southwest Atlanta, pairing business students from historically black colleges and universities with working professionals in private equity and acquisitions. The first cohort of 8 had begun in September. Richard Voss had voluntarily surrendered his license pending the outcome of the State Bar disciplinary review, expected to conclude the following spring. Voss and Crane had entered a management transition under new leadership. It would likely survive. That was not Darnell's concern. Simone had retained new counsel, negotiated a settlement considerably less favorable than what she had anticipated, and relocated to an apartment in Decatur. She had left her position at the hospitality firm by mutual agreement. Brandon Holt had moved to Nashville following the collapse of a development partnership. Simone's mother had called Darnell once, briefly, to say something that was not quite an apology and not nothing. He had thanked her and wished her well and meant it. He had not spoken to Simone since the morning in the courthouse hallway. He had nothing left to say that the documents had not already said more precisely. He pressed one cedar board with the toe of his boot, firm, sealed, true. The garden along the far fence ran full with tomatoes his Aunt Gloria had started for him from seed, fat and splitting at their sides in the warm October air. Jade wrote something in her notebook. A bird moved across the yard and was gone. He had built everything worth keeping. He was not looking back. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.